Yeah, thank you all for joining us. We're always conscious of your time and truly appreciate you taking your time today to interact with us and engage in this topic. For those of you who haven't had a chance to meet me yet, I'm Brian Flanagan, and I'm the VP of Buildings at the Transition Accelerator and the Executive Director of the Building Decarbonization Alliance. Today's discussion is decarbonization at scale, what we're learning about thermal energy networks, and that's exactly what we're going to be talking about. It's such a vast topic, and we've waded into this space over the last year or so, and there's just such a depth of things to learn and understand about the potential of this approach to providing heating and cooling to our buildings. And so we thought it would be appropriate to have this as a topic for discussion and to just share what we're learning to date. So this is part of our Building Decarbonization Alliance webinar series aimed at provoking discussion and sharing knowledge from all of our leading decarbonization experts in the space. And we hold these every couple of months or so. So keep your eyes peeled. We have more of these coming up. Pour ceux qui sont français, malgré que le webinaire soit présenté en anglais, vous pouvez activer l'option afficher sous-titres située au bas de votre écran et recevoir une transcription simultanée pour l'événement. So while today's session is in English, you can turn on the CCs at the bottom of the screen there to receive a simultaneous translation. Know that all of us today we have staff across all of the country. We're a remote organization, and so we acknowledge the many traditional territories of the Indigenous peoples on which we work and live. I happen to be joining you today from Ottawa, Ontario, the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people who have been meeting at the confluence of the Ottawa and Gatineau rivers of 4 Points there for millennia, and who hold this land dear. So I just invite you all to go into the chat and let us know where you're calling from today so we can see that. In terms of some logistics for the Q&A, please use the actual Q&A function that's at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. And we'll also be holding a few polling questions today during the call. So let's just try that out now, John, if we can get the first polling question up. It's how familiar are you with thermal energy networks? And it's a 1 to 10, 1 being not familiar at all and 10 being very familiar. And that'll help us to help panelists as well understand who it is that we're speaking with today and what you're coming into the session with. So while we're experiencing while we're waiting for the response, if you're experiencing any technical issues at all, John Perkis and Viola Zhu from our team are available to help out. So you can just message them as well with the DM in your chat function today. So we can go to the next slide, John. I'll just kind of quickly go through the agenda for today. What we're going to do is just a short overview of the BDA really quickly and what we're going to be chatting about today. And then I'll introduce our moderator, Jordan McDonald from Research Strategies, as he'll facilitate the conversation with our panelists. And then we'll have some time for Q&A. I suspect that we're going to generate a lot of interesting questions over the conversation, so we'll try to leave as much time as possible for that. Again, please write your questions in the Q&A section so that it's easy for us to find them and then prioritize them and respond to them. All right, we can go to the next slide, John. Now, many of you, obviously, I recognize from the participants list, many of you are really familiar with our work. For those of you who aren't, we're a nonpartisan cross-sector coalition. We now have over 300 organizations from across the entire building ecosystem, which is even hard for me to believe after only 2 short years. It's really wonderful, the reception that we've had in the space. Our role is really, really simple, but I think it's pretty critical. We're here to identify friction points in our building ecosystem, whether those are technical, financial, policy, having to do with workforce and labor, and then work with all of you, our partners, to co-develop practical solutions to try to accelerate a market transformation that's equitable, affordable, and that ultimately contributes to a low carbon energy system and ultimately a really competitive Canadian economy. And those are themes that you're going to hear all throughout the conversation today. All of this is linked together in that way. If all of this is interesting to you as an organization and resonates with your mission and values, we'll have information at the end of the session about how you can join our movement at the end of the webinar here. And we obviously can, really encourage all of you to consider joining our work so that we can do more of this kind of good work. We can go to the next slide, thanks. We undertake a lot of projects. Our team is exceedingly busy pumping out this kind of material. And it's just way too much for me to go over in the short time that I have with you here today. But I do want to really mention our work to create this year a national building decarbonization action plan. We're going to be releasing that in 2026. We've been working all this year with people sort of all across the country and across the building ecosystem to gather insights into the kinds of practical actions that might move us forward as an industry to decarbonize our buildings. And that work is going to culminate at our National Building Decarbonization Forum that we're hosting this year, again in November at the National Arts Center in Ottawa, where we're going to share and debate and refine all of these ideas. Um, Excuse me, I note through our registration list that we have a lot of participants from Manitoba. So I want to just a special call out our next engagement as part of this National Building Decarbonization Action Plan is actually taking place as a regional workshop, which we've held a number across the country already. And that's going to be taking place in Winnipeg on May 21st with building leaders from all across Manitoba. So so welcome to all of you from that province. And if any of that is of interest to you and you weren't aware of it, just please reach out to John after the session. We'd love to hear from you and get your thoughts on that. And if there's an opportunity for you to participate, we would like to try to accommodate that as much as possible. So that's sort of it on the sort of background and high level of ourselves and what we've been up to. I'd like to just quickly talk about how TENS fit into our overall strategy. Obviously, decarbonizing buildings is not going to be a one technology, one approach thing. We seem to talk a lot about air source heat pumps in the residential sector whenever we talk about decarbonizing our buildings, but obviously there's going to be a lot of different technologies and approaches to get us to the end goal. We really think that in certain contexts, thermal energy networks offer a complementary strategy to the traditional sort of building by building, appliance by appliance decarbonization approach. There's a certain scale to all of this that offers different opportunities, especially when you think of the scale required to train up a workforce or to give the impetus for labor to get really excited about the kinds of projects that are available. That doesn't necessarily happen when you look at building by building approaches. And that said, we when we got into the space, we started realizing that there's a lot of advocates and proponents for thermal energy networks, many of whom are on the call today, who've been working really hard to advance these in their corners of the world. We don't really have a national picture of what the real national potential is for this approach to contribute to decarbonizing our buildings by 2050. And so that's why we undertook an initiative this year to really try to scratch that itch and understand, what kind of potential to contribute to our decarbonization goals. This really represents when you take it to scale, and maybe importantly, where it does apply, but also where it won't apply, and where we need to continue to lean into the building by building approaches that we've been doing. So we recognize that the need to get our buildings decarbonized is going to call on a bunch of different approaches and different ways of thinking. And this idea of looking at a community level to try to find answers to that is also something that's been a bit lacking in our space. So that's the context and what we're trying to get to. And it's encapsulated in the title of the webinar that you're all participating in today. So, I mean, that's tons from me. I don't like to take the airwaves when we've got such a talented panel on tap for the discussion today. So I'm going to just hand it off to Gerard McDonald, who's been an amazing supporter of our work and a great ally to work with and to collaborate with. So Gerard, over to you, and good luck with the session.
Great. Thanks so much, Brian. Hi, everyone. Gerard McDonald. I'm principal with Reshape Strategies. And yeah, I have to commend the BDA team. Like I'm watching the numbers tick up here on the participants. We're cracked 100 into 3 digits, and they've done a great job at convening the conversation around thermal energy networks coast to coast to coast. And I think it's reflected in the number of people we have here today. And I can't help but wonder with the new government and the desire to build. I think thermal energy networks in our cities could be a good candidate to kind of fulfill some of that vision. My job here today is to put some questions to Amy and Orly and Keith. So we've got a queue line here, but we're going to start with some intros, and I'm going to start with you, Amy. Amy Jacobs is a senior vice president with commercial operations at Enwave, and maybe just to get the ball rolling, tell us a little bit about the work that you do in this space, and maybe what's one thing that you should that you think people should understand about TENS that is often misunderstood? So, we'll start with you, Amy, and then we'll go to Orly and Keith on the intros.
Okay, sure. Thank you and welcome everybody. I guess here in Toronto it is afternoon, so good afternoon. But if any other time zones, good morning. So at Enwave, first of all, Enwave is one of the largest commercial owner operators of district energy systems in North America. My role, I am located within Toronto, but I'm responsible for all of the growth of Enwave. So the strategy development for how we grow, where we grow, the actual analysis of those deals or those potential opportunities, and right through into commercial contracting and structuring of those various arrangements for our growth. My team also includes our advocacy and engagement, which is really critical, especially in a time like this, as we're looking to move forward with decarbonization and really ensuring that district energy is well placed in those conversations. And I'm sure with many of you, we've had those conversations. And then my team also oversees marketing and our sustainability function as well, because those tie in extremely close to how we grow and where we grow. So that's a little bit about me and my role at Enwave. I think to respond to the question, I think as Brian alluded to actually in his opening comments, it's not a one size fits all. So I think a common misinterpretation or misunderstanding out there is I've seen it done this way, or this is, sort of the structure of how it's been done. I think especially in my experience and being at the table for many of these commercial arrangements, there is a need for all the parties to come together and collaborate to think differently. And that's really what we encourage. And we really want to understand how to bring the greatest value to everybody that's at the table. So I think that's probably the most misunderstood thing that I see, and something I certainly aspire to break that mold on.
Great. Thanks, Amy. We'll go to you next, Aurélie Beauvais. I'm starting my day here in Vancouver. The sun's coming up. You're nearing the end of the day where you're joining us from. So maybe you can tell us, again, same question, a bit about yourself and where you fit in the TEN space, district energy space, and what are some common misconceptions that you're navigating in your work?
Yes, thanks a lot, Gerard, and it's indeed a pleasure to participate to today's webinar. So Euroheat and Power is the European association promoting sustainable district heating and cooling solutions towards the European Union. So in Europe, energy legislation, 1/3 of energy legislation is produced by European institutions in Brussels. And so we work in this field to make sure that we have a supportive framework for developing district heating and cooling networks in Europe, modernizing them where it's needed, and building new units mostly everywhere in our countries. So we do so through classical advocacy, but we do also a lot of market intelligence events, and we really try to create, I would say, a resourceful and a virtuous ecosystem, which is putting together policymakers, industry, academia, because we also, one thing that we've learned from the European experience, at least, is that the lack of knowledge, both in terms of market potential and technology availability, is actually one of the biggest barriers, because the moment you know about what's in store in terms of the versatility of the technologies of thermal energy networks and the potential that you have, when you know, you really can't avoid to start doing it more. So I think it liaises to the question that you asked, what surprises me the most and that people are not aware of that much. I think really the versatility of this technology. I mean, it's crazy to think that it has been developed since the 70s, at least in Europe, and it works perfectly. And you can basically generate heat with almost anything, excess heat from a metro, from a sewage water, from trains. You can cool a city with almost anything as well. So I think this technology is incredibly versatile, and it brings us to a potential which is really underused today.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you very much, Aurélie. A lot of insights I think we'll get from Aurélie, and a jurisdiction that's arguably much more mature than we are here in North America, and I think a lot to learn. So we'll go to you next, Keith. Amy and Aurélie are thousands of kilometers away. You're a few blocks away from me here in Vancouver. Why don't you tell us all a bit about yourself, where Creatives fits into the space, and again, those misunderstandings that you come across.
Great, thanks Gerard, and great to see everybody. Yeah, so I'm Keith Bate. I'm the Director of Engineering with Creative Energy. Creative Energy, for those that don't know us, we have a 55-year-old district energy system in Vancouver, BC. We're providing heating to over 200 buildings in the downtown core. We're also developing a number of new district energy systems, including currently in construction. We have a project with the Squamish Nation at Sanok, which is a 6,000 unit rental development on their reserve lands. We're also building a new system up at Thompson Rivers University in Kamloops to heat their decarbonize an existing university campus. My role is basically right through from concept development through construction, supporting our design teams, right through into operations and optimizing the efficiency of our systems. To speak a bit to the question, I mean, I echo certainly the previous two comments about, there is no one-size-fits-all solution to district energy. Every opportunity is unique in terms of the challenges and the opportunities that are available to decarbonize. One thing that I come across often is the question, like, what's the payback period? And this, I think, comes from the reality that a lot of people evaluating the district energy option come from a sort of an energy audit background where they're looking for energy cost savings, and they're not recognizing that district energy is not just about you shouldn't be comparing it just to your gas bill. It's about when you connect to district energy, you're also reducing your capital costs in terms of infrastructure, operation, maintenance. So it's a full life cycle cost assessment that needs to be done, and not just a straight energy cost comparison.
Great. Thanks, Keith. So we'll jump right into our line of questions here. We'll start with you, Amy, and maybe just to help, a little more level setting around language. We're seeing this a bit different terms pops up, nomenclature. Thermal energy networks is what we're talking about here today. Is the branding BDA is using, but it's also district energy, neighborhood energy, community energy, heat networks, popular in the UK and Europe. Maybe tell us about how you refer to the systems in your work. And do you think that this diversity of terms, is it helpful or is it sowing division? Maybe just your perspective on that a little bit.
Sure. So, full disclosure, I did have to do some Googling on some of the terms, which can probably indicate my answer. And what I did was just sort of acknowledge the consistencies amongst all the definitions. So I think they all involve the verbiage surrounding underground pipes, central generation of energy, and more than one building. And so in my world, we refer to it always as district energy. In the simplicity of those sort of three characteristics. So as long as you're talking about serving more than one building, it's a district, right? It's a network, it's a community. In my personal experience, I don't see a difference in using the different terminology. It doesn't actually come up typically in any of the conversations that we're having, at least within Ontario and the Maritimes in Canada. And I'm not sure if any of the other participants are getting questions at that level in their locations. But here in Ontario and within the Maritimes of Canada, I think district energy is generally the accepted term that people understand. I think, my own perspective is there may be grounds for differences when you start talking about these scale of networks within a regulated versus unregulated environment, and potentially within different countries. To us, district energy is any thermal energy service, but I suppose there could be grounds for sort of narrowing that definition if it is just one type of generation source potentially. But as far as I'm concerned, when you're talking about underground pipes and providing energy from a central location to more than one building, that's district energy.
That's great. Thanks for that, Amy. I think that's good level setting for the scope of what we're talking about and the kind of universality of the concept, but it may have just different labels assigned to it. Aurelio, I want to go to you next, and we really wanted to elevate this question early on because I think your answer here is really helpful for those working in North America around this idea of heating and cooling plans. And we know that they're mandatory in Europe. There's a lot of conversation here in Canada and North America around where and when and how we do them. So maybe just, tell us more about this heating and cooling plans in the EU.
Yeah, my pleasure, because indeed you're right. Heating and cooling plans, as we see it, are really instrumental to drive, I would say, the awareness on all the benefits of district heating and cooling networks, and then their growth. So indeed, we have in Europe now the Energy Efficiency Directive, and it is entering into force this year in 2025. It mandates all municipalities above 45,000 citizens to carry out a heating and cooling plan. And it is extremely good for us. Some countries are more advanced than others, including big countries. For example, in Germany, it's already 98% of the municipalities above 45,000 citizens which have already started or finished their plan, and it has been implemented, so made mandatory by the federal German government. And what we see is everywhere it's done, municipalities end up realizing the huge potential of district energy networks in their city to simply decarbonize and defossilize their building stock. So usually we talk about a potential which is between 30 to 50%. For example, close to my city in Brussels, we have a very industrialized city, Antwerp. It's a huge port. It's a lot of industries. And they did their heating and cooling plan, and they found that district heating and cooling should supply half of their city's building. So from almost nothing to 50% in 2050, it's enormous, and they are already putting in place the instruments to achieve this at the corresponding horizon. If you look at other countries like Ireland, they found that 50% of their heat demand at country level should be covered by district heating, and the city of Dublin, the capital city, they did their planning and they found that district heating should cover 80% because they have so much renewable and excess heat sources in terms of that could supply their building stock. So it looks anecdotal, but when you take a step up and you look at the European potential, you end up with similar shares. Recent studies suggest that more than 50% of our building stock, especially, of course, in dense urban areas, should be supplied by district heating. But we have most of our population in Europe that lives anyway in dense urban areas. So it's really something that comes together with the trend we see in terms of the evolution of the population. And I think it's just so efficient just because the resources are so abundant. To give you an order of magnitude, in Europe, the estimated resources just in terms of excess or waste heat are about 2,000 terawatt hour per year. And it's more than the forecasted heat demand in Europe in 2050. So there's more than enough to do wonders in terms of replacing fossil heating. And you know that the geopolitical situation right now in Europe really calls for this type of substitution. So yeah, a lot to do.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for that response, Aurélie. And some parallels here with our recent desire for energy independence. And Canada, despite being so large, is also a very urban nation. And I think part of the work the BDA team here is doing is to kind of define what the opportunity is. We're starting from a very small share. Some estimates 2-3% of floor area connected to thermal networks now, and I think we'll define what the top end might be. Amy, I saw your hand flash up there. Did you want to have a follow-up on that?
It was more of even a question for me, but maybe it would help the audience.
Absolutely.
What is the reason or the main underlying reason that the mandate is coming through to actually look at heating and cooling planning? Like, are they taking that point of view because they believe that there is excess waste heat to be utilized, or are they taking that view because they have decarbonization targets? Like, what is the underlying source of that push for the planning?
Yeah, I think the starting point indeed is more the need to achieve our climate targets when it was conceived, because of course this directive, the work started even before the Ukraine war started. So before the whole discussion, I would say, on energy independence took so much the forefront. And here we know that, for example, in Europe, the power transition is well advanced, but the heating and cooling transition has been a complete blank spot. So yeah, the idea was also to start inspiring ourselves from countries like Denmark, Finland, and Sweden, which actually had an energy crisis shock in the 70s. And in the 70s, they were forced to reduce drastically their fossil fuel use, and they did it through planning. So there was a bit this inspiration from northern and Baltic countries to do that. But now we see that the rationale is shifting, and cities are doing planning because they're scared. Because I think the very strong increase in gas prices following the war surprised a lot of people, including municipalities. We spent a lot of money to hedge consumers from increasing prices. And now it's more a matter of reducing fossil fuel use as fast as possible. And here we have a stronger awareness that renewable sources and excess heat sources are there now. So yeah, there's different shift to it.
Great. Well, thanks, Amy. Thanks, Orly. We'll go to Keith next. We have the same drivers here, federally, all provinces, all cities, they have climate targets. But you can achieve those goals at the building scale or with these neighborhood scale network solutions. And really it's trade-offs. And I thought maybe you could offer the group here, maybe your perspective on some of those trade-offs, impacts on the grid, ease of implementation, cost, other, just between building by building and the neighborhood scale approach.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think just to sort of follow up what I already was saying there, like you're right, we do have the same drivers from a policy and level and aspirational level, but what we don't have here is the same energy cost. And I think that's a big factor. Obviously, in Europe is the price of energy, and there's an economic case to be made that's a little more challenging to make here. I mean, your question there really speaks to one of the big things we always face is demand risk. As a private sector, thermal energy district energy developer, it's very hard for us to take demand risk on potential load growth. As you know, there's a number of municipality-owned systems here near Vancouver there where they can mandate connection to their system, so they know that if growth is planned in an area, they can build out their system with relatively little risk. There's no framework currently for municipalities to mandate connection to a privately owned district energy system, and so although our investors are very willing to and very keen to invest money to build district energy systems, they're also not particularly keen to take risk on whether that load will or ever arrive. So I think that's a challenge we face. I mean, in terms of the building owners, obviously the trade-off for them in terms of the decision making is around, do they want to invest a fairly substantial amount of capital cost up front when it's a one-time decision, or do they want to make a long-term commitment and not have that capital cost, but make a long-term commitment to a contractual agreement with a third party such as Creative Energy or Enwave. So that's that different people will approach that in different ways, obviously, and their time scale of their decision making might be different as well. So yeah, different perspectives there from sort of our side, looking out trying to grow our systems, and then at the building level, thinking about whether they want to make a one big decision and then lock themselves into a technology, for example, for 30 years, or are they prepared to sign a contract and trust that their district energy provider will help them along the way and help them meet their energy targets as they evolve.
Yeah, and that idea of evolution of the building, evolution of the network, even evolution of these systems. I think Amy, Enwave has an interesting history of evolving ownership type and even technologies. And it started as a municipally owned system and provided steam with fossil fuel only sources. Now it's a privately owned system, steam, hot water, chill water, power. Maybe talk about that evolution of the utility over time, both from an ownership perspective and the different technologies.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, Enwave was originally an amalgamation of existing steam systems here in downtown Toronto that were developed for the cluster of major hospitals. That amalgamation happened in the late 90s with the City of Toronto and OMERS pension plan, so a public-private partnership, and that really formed Enwave. at that time, there was the initial planning for a district cooling system, and that was Enwave's Deep Lake Water Cooling System. And so that ownership structure and being municipally owned at the time was really what allowed us to develop such a unique asset like Deep Lake Water Cooling, and really launched us into being a district energy, provider, as opposed to just a steam provider to select network in Toronto. Subsequent to that, in 2012, we were sold to private ownership under Brookfield. So that sale was really about commercializing the business. So it was then taking what had been developed, the Deep Lake Water Cooling System, and maximizing it. So really looking for scale. We acquired 14 different systems across North America and really started, this is where I think the transition really started in recognizing the full potential of district energy and the types of different technologies that could be used interchangeably. And we started to shift the way we think at that point in time to how can we grow? How can we think about the community at large more holistically? And that was really a great launching off point for us in our third and what we believe is final ownership structure. We're now strictly within Canada today as Enwave, owned by Ontario Teachers Pension Plan and IFM investors, who are sustainable, focused, long-term investors, and they're really looking to grow Enwave as that low carbon energy provider. And again, beyond just heating and cooling potentially, but let's think about energy holistically. And this is really where the shift over time is Enwave and utilities as a partner to the community, as a partner to municipalities, really looking at us as a potential solution to think differently about energy and how we might solve problems together within the community and within each development itself. So I think that's generally been the transition, and the technology again continues to change a bit along the way. But the beauty of these systems is you just continue to add, and we really love to look for those big, large scale opportunities that you can really only implement when you have scale.
Yeah, and like the fourth intake, and I think Enwave's Deep Lake Cooling is internationally renowned, and the first evolution got to Keith's point there about load security, right? With having that municipal ownership and focusing on municipal buildings, and now evolving over time to have investment from the private sector. We're kind of jumping back, technology, ownership, regulatory. We're going to go to Orly next, and maybe I'd like you to speak a little bit about one of the kind of the other benefits or attributes of district energy, thermal energy networks we haven't talked about today. It's the impact on the grid versus building by building approaches, and maybe even the role of thermal energy storage in the mix on that. So maybe some of your thoughts around that, please.
Yes, absolutely. It's a very important topic indeed, which is also heavily underestimated from our perspective. We hear often in Europe that there's a competition between electrification and district energy network, and that if you electrify, you cannot develop district energy network, and that's entirely false. We see that, on the contrary, developing district energy networks is actually helping to accelerate the electrification of our economy. First, because more and more electrification also means deploying district energy networks. It's just about the frontier of electrification, as you call it, either building level or district level. But in the future, our district energy networks will rely a lot on large heat pumps and power to heat technologies in general. But also, when you look at the complementarity between, I would say, individual solutions and collective solutions, district energy network really help, I would say, address a lot of challenges that at least Europe encounters today when it comes to their electrification policies. So first, electrifying heating and cooling is really not something easy. Because it's not, it's a very specific demand. It's seasonal, it's highly volatile, even within a season. So for example, where I live in Belgium, the weather can vary of 10, 15 degrees from one day to another, even in winter. So that requires a system that is very flexible, that is able to peak very high. And for example, in France, peak variation can go up to 20 gigawatts. So it's huge. And here it really calls for complementarity. And in this context, when you develop, for example, district energy networks, well, first you reduce the need for peak load. So in Sweden, the Swedish Energy Agency, they did a study where they tried to replace all the district energy networks that they have with individual heat pumps, and they modeled what it would do to their system. And they found that it would increase the need for peak capacity of about 10 gigawatts. So that means that their current district energy infrastructure is saving them 10 gigawatt of peak loads. So that's about 10 nuclear reactors they don't need, for example, in winter. That's quite big. In the Netherlands, on the contrary, they did another study and they found that district energy network really help reducing system costs for consumer. In Europe, network charges are becoming one of the highest part on the energy bill. It's about 30% of the bill for European consumers due to the higher cost incurred by the higher complexity and volatility of the system. And district energy would reduce those costs by about 40%. Because they reduce local congestion, they help alleviate the heat demand, and because then they reduce the need for new grid investments. And lastly, of course, you mentioned it, flexibility. So while we are moving towards a system that is much more variable, we're still trying to find how to store, how to provide flexibility. And it's true that here, thermal energy storage is really the only truly mature and scalable seasonal storage technology that we have, for example. So we already have large thermal storage facilities in Denmark and other countries which can store heat for up to 4 or 5 months. We can store heat also at quite high temperature. I mean, the more it goes, the more you find specific storage technologies like with molten salt that can store up to 500 degrees and with very high efficiencies. The price of thermal storage is much more competitive, about 100 times cheaper than battery storage. And it's also it's using far less rare materials. And in Europe, it's another big debate, using the rare materials, importing them. What do we do about lithium? What do we do about copper and cobalt? So I think, yeah, here again, not saying we should totally switch to thermal storage, but saying that here there's a very large potential to be exploited, including with power to heat technology. So heat pumps today, large heat pumps are becoming a very natural ally to the electricity system. They activate themselves when prices are low or negative, which is happening in a lot more countries as they are increasing their shares. So yeah, we see a bright future for thermal flexibility.
Great. Thanks, Aurélie. Wow, 100 times cheaper. I think, there's few things we find in this sector where there is that magnitude of delta, all the batteries, and you're right, it's complementary, right? There's a role for electric batteries, but also huge potential for thermal storage. And I think we'll stay there because, both Enwave and Creative Energy are realizing this on some of their recent projects. Like Amy, correct me if I'm wrong. I think your system, and not only attributed to thermal storage, but also Deep Lake and other, it's estimated that you're mitigating in the order of 60 megawatts at peak from the local electric grid. I mean, that's a substantive number for a place like Toronto. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that, and also about the thermal energy storage system at the well and its role, and also the decision making around putting in that big piece of infrastructure.
Yeah. So I was going to jump in on that. So thank you, Gerard. Yes, 60 megawatts of peak grid capacity is saved here in downtown Toronto by our existing Deep Lake water cooling system, by the district energy system. And similar to some of those studies that Aurélie is mentioning, we are working closely with the city here in Toronto to develop the same or similar type of argument or analysis to help bolster the importance of having district energy or thinking large scale about how we electrify. And exactly as you said, it's really about accelerating electrification and thinking holistically about it. District energy can help significantly in the transition and save a lot of resources ultimately, especially in grid constrained areas like downtown Toronto. The well asset, so the well itself is a 3 million square foot mixed use development here in downtown Toronto, developed by RioCan and Allied. It has a large commercial tower and 6 residential towers. When we were looking at pursuing connecting that building to our existing system, we worked very closely with RioCan and Allied to develop the asset within that building and that community. So that is our thermal storage tank. Again, having deep lake water cooling and being able to utilize deep lake water cooling to charge that asset overnight when electricity prices here in Ontario are very low, and discharge it through the day on peak is not only significant electricity savings, but also significant cost savings to all of our users. So that was the real driver. And then alongside that, we also then recognize the opportunity for the dual use nature of it and how we're expanding our heating system. So connecting to the well, separate and distinct from the development of the storage tank itself, but really had a fantastic collaboration and partnership with RioCan and Allied there in being able to accomplish installing that thermal tank below the lowest parking level. So parking level 7 of a downtown Toronto development is quite the feat.
Great, and I think maybe just to give everyone a sense of scale, and I'm usually pretty militant about using metric units, but I think for this, people's heads will, 75 feet across and 150 feet deep. Is that right? Like a giant cylinder below P7. Yep. So it's not small. It's not. Keith, the Sanok project here that you mentioned at the outset, it's also employing thermal energy storage. Maybe same thing. What were the drivers behind that? And give folks a sense of the scale of what it's going to, the benefits it's going to provide to the system.
Sure, yeah. So yeah, as you mentioned, we have thermal storage for our project at Sanok. That decision was made quite early in the design phase and was really driven by the opportunity to reduce peak electrical demand charges. In BC, we don't have variable hourly pricing. We have a demand charge of around $13 per kilowatt per month. And that project from the outset wanted to be zero carbon, and so that meant that it's large scale electrification, which if you just put electric boilers in for peaking, you're looking at some very heavy demand charges. So we included thermal storage there to reduce those peak demands and manage the peak heating loads on the development. And we achieved a payback of around about, I said don't use payback before, but in this case, there was a payback of around 2 to 3 years on the cost of the tank. So very economical solution to reduce the size of the service needed to the development. And just to sort of speak on that point a bit more, I mean, that is certainly, one of the main drivers, I think, as we see district energy moving forward is the sector coupling with electricity and reducing the demand on the grid. For that project, for example, we're doing sewer heat recovery, which, allows us to be far more efficient than an air source heat pump solution that might have been used if they'd served each building individually. And, we can only do sewer heat recovery because we're doing a district solution. We can't have 12 buildings connecting to a municipal sewer main, whereas our central energy plant can connect and access that high grade or relatively high grade heat source to improve the efficiency of the heat pumps. I think one key point to note there, though, the thermal storage there, like it made financial sense, but only because the development was committed to zero carbon, and that's the key point. Like you have to remember what you're comparing that option to. If you were comparing it to just making your gas boilers bigger, the business case may not have been there. So as with all of these things, it's important to understand what the alternative is when you're looking at these options.
Yeah, and I think that
we'll put in the chat of those tanks just in case anyone wants to see as well.
Yeah, great. I think it's tremendously helpful to kind of get a sense of scale, and I think for the idea of thermal storage at a master plan scale community, it's a great precedent, and hopefully we see, or there's opportunity to see more of that in the future, because as you mentioned, like the counterfactual in a lot of cities with really advanced green building standards, Vancouver and Toronto, it's near zero carbon or zero carbon in pretty soon as the next waves come in. But I'm looking ahead at some of the Q&A here, and there's questions about new construction, existing buildings. So maybe I'll weave that into my last question to Orly before we go to the Q&A from the audience that John is going to facilitate. So again, just another reminder, a prompt to either upvote or put some questions in the Q&A. But before we go there, Orly, I want to go back to this idea of area-based heating cooling plans, and these are for existing cities. So maybe you can just underscore that it's both new and existing buildings in a city. But that really, that gets you in a sense to the starting gate. So, now you've defined that there's some study that says, half of your buildings should follow a decarb pathway via thermal energy network, but there's, maybe only a thermal energy network for your 10% of your buildings. It's kind of the case of here in Vancouver. Getting from A to B, it's a lot of work, a lot of different parties. Maybe you can talk a little bit about like how that collaboration, how you see it unfolding, if there are trends, roles of the municipality versus, private sector. Invite you to weave in comments on regulatory models that you're seeing as part of those trends. A bit open-ended, but we've got our heating cooling plan. Now what? Maybe tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in different EU cities.
Yeah, that's a tough question. Indeed. But, as soon as you've done the starting point, what we see is, you need quite some things to make it work. But the good news is that none of those things is impossible to reach. It's just that you need probably all of them at the same time. Okay, the starting point is really, for me, awareness, consumer awareness, municipal awareness, and building trust. There's an element in the chat which says that, for example, in the city of Toronto, I don't know if it was Toronto, but that people don't believe it's feasible or they don't trust. It's everywhere the case. In some areas, district energy has a bad reputation. It's not only us. A lot of clean techs have a bad reputation for the past and had to evolve from it. My past sector, solar PV, had a terrible reputation in early 2000 and now is like the lifesaver in Europe. So you need to build trust, and here you need regulation. So what we see is that in a lot of countries like France, but also Italy, the UK, or Germany, the government has tasked the regulator to look at some critical elements to ensure also the protection of consumers. So, for example, we're looking at price setting and price transparency, how to make sure that if you kind of mandate that an area is connected to it, because when you develop a district energy system, you do need a critical mass of consumer. I would say about 70% of the people located in an area. So how do you make sure that the price is established in a fair way? What is included in the price? It's obvious for electricity. In many countries, it was very shady, I would say, and now we're putting some transparency to it. How do you make sure that there are also minimum technical and quality standards with regards to the maintenance, the quality of the supply delivery? That's what Ofgem is doing in the UK. So that's a starting point, I would say, which has to be done in Europe. That's the national level. I don't know how it works in Canada, but the regulator has to look at it to put in place, I would say, the minimum requirements for the consumer and the cities to trust the solution, and further put in place, for example, targets to develop it. Then there's another question in the chat which mentions the cost of, for example, the plans, and that's typically indeed something we need to address. So the cities, many cities don't have the financial and the technical and human resources to develop such plans. So right now in Europe, we are, for example, granting state aid for cities that need to pay for the audits or consultancies that have to do this exercise. So they receive subsidies to do that. And we think we could do much more, but financing and technical support is a very important element. In Germany, they mandated and they developed, I would say, a sub-part of their energy agency, which is doing only that, technical assistance for cities that want to develop the plan. So that's a very critical element. And lastly, it's a route where, for me, the ownership model doesn't matter. In some countries, it's public. In some countries, it's private. In many countries, it's mixed. I don't think it defines success or not. But for me, the key is really the consumer journey. Recently, my gas boiler broke. I live in Brussels. In Brussels, we're super dense areas. Almost all of us, we have a gas boiler, some even worse, mazout boilers and stuff. Very few people have heat pumps. It's really dense. And I could not find a suitable solution. I mean, I brought, I don't know how many installers that told me that, I could not do this or that. And they were just keeping to proposing me just a better boiler. And I tried to contact my commune to know about district energy, and they were unable to tell me if one day there would be something in my area. So that's why we think that, changing heat system is just a hassle. Very few people care. It's not like a nice car you can show off. You don't care. You just want heating at a decent price. So we see that, yeah, maybe if cities would also associate the planning with really accompanying their citizens to say, for example, okay, in 5 years, you're going to be connected to a system. That means if your boiler breaks, contact us and we will provide you, for example, a temporary solution. That's what they did in Denmark. If you were in an area to be connected, you could just get a temporary boiler in the meantime until they connect you. Or if you're not in a district energy area, then you have direct incentive to heat pump solutions and they just, so yeah, I think accompanying consumers and defining a much simpler, accessible consumer journey is also key.
Excellent. Thanks. And yeah, I underscore that that simplicity. I can tell you anecdotally about my journey for my home heating electrification another time, but it's the same thing. I think you're right. People just, they want heat and they want it to be low cost and they want it to be simple. You know, as much as we love this, it's not the case for everybody, but it is for another 100 people here. And we're also gonna get their questions here. But thanks for that, Aurélie. I did want to, you know, maybe just rephrase or recap, because I think you told that picture well about it's almost like it's federally funded, municipally led, and then private sector supported. And you think about the ingredients and the roles of all those. And again, I hope this BDA work is, you know, going to be in service to getting the feds a little bit more into the conversation here. John, I'm going to turn it over to you to maybe to stick handle the Q&A here. And yeah, so I'll pass it off to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Lots of interesting questions. I'm going to combine a couple of them. So there's one from Don and Philip. Can you talk about existing neighborhoods? So the application of TENS in existing neighborhoods, low density suburban. And then Philip St. Jean had a similar one. Do you see TENS growth in the next 10 years happening primarily in new built or in existing communities as well? So interesting to hear the panel's thoughts on that one.
I could go first, maybe. So we have a couple of projects at least in development for existing communities, but they are with healthcare and post-secondary university campuses where commitments have been made to decarbonize, and they have a funding challenge. You know, and so there's a great fit for them to bring in private sector financing to help them deliver those projects and hit the commitments that their leadership team have made. I think to see significant growth of new TENS, new district energy for existing residential communities will require municipal intervention to really move those things forward at a policy level, because you've got so many different stakeholders to bring on board to make those things happen. You know, it's going to require support, I think, from a policy lens. Whereas, you know, a large healthcare campus, it's multiple stakeholders, but ultimately one decision maker that can advance the project.
Aurélie or Amy, any other additions to that question?
I mean, I think it's been said already, but it is obviously going to be area dependent and dependent on a number of factors, and the cost and availability of gas versus electricity is a big one in that decision and in that framework. And so as it relates to residential communities in Ontario, it's potentially going to be more challenging unless it's driven from the municipalities themselves and mandated and then somehow flown and pushed through regulated utilities.
Okay, well, I'm going to come back to you, Amy, as well. There's a question in here from Don where he's talking about some of the developments that have taken place. I don't know if you saw the written question, but I'll read it out. Enwave has developed a new residential system in Markham with Mattamy Homes, I think called Berksea Glen. I understand the system works as planned. I also understand that Enwave decided not to expand the thermal system at that time. So I don't know if you have any details on that you're
sure. Yeah. So we're now referring to it as Springwater. So Mattamy Homes Canada, it's a 312 single family home development. This was phase one of the development. And so it was a partnership with Mattamy Homes Canada and the city of Markham and Enwave. And so here it really was establishing the importance of collaboration, and there was a lot of time put in by those three parties to really figure out how to make this work and make it cost competitive. So yes, the system is operational since 2022, I believe. It's working as intended, and the idea is on the basis of cost neutrality versus the alternative, which would have been traditional HVAC systems in the homes. So Enwave itself did not make a decision necessarily not to pursue the next phase, but what we did want to do was see how it works and give it some time to ensure that that model is something that's replicated, and to really be able to take down appropriate lessons learned and apply those as we go forward into further iterations of that type of development. And for quick clarity, I guess, just from a technical perspective, it is a geo-exchange district system. So we have boreholes located within the rights of way as opposed to within individual home and property boundaries. And each home gets an offtake lateral pipe from the right of way into the home. And then each home has a heat pump to individually control their heating and cooling.
John, if I may, and I don't want to overstep my role as moderator here, but I do have one comment that I think might be helpful to the conversation. This is another area where I think new versus existing, is a important differentiation. So new master plan community, relatively low density. You're putting pipes in the ground while you're trenching with other utilities. There's some efficiencies of like having one master plan developer, a directionality to do this, network geo solution for, single family homes in new construction. I would say the context is very different in existing buildings when you're talking about digging up the streets and saddling a network cost with all of those infrastructure costs. And it just becomes a lot more challenging. Orly's benchmarks there, another way to look at the 30 to 50% of network solutions, that's saying that 50 to 70% of the city is building scale solutions. And I think, one of the reasons is it's tough for existing neighborhoods, low density neighborhoods, to absorb the cost of all that infrastructure. Thanks.
No, that's great. So there's a couple more questions in here. We'll try and get to those afterwards. We've got a couple of minutes left just for closing comments from Brian. And I just wanted to respect everyone's time today. So Brian, over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really typical on our webinars. People have to get to something else and people start dropping off real quick. But I just wanted, before people do that, want to acknowledge the amazing conversation that we've had here and thank our panelists, Amy, Keith, Aurélie, and Gerard as well, for agreeing to moderate the whole thing. I'd like to just reiterate that the BDA is working on two major projects, a multi-year initiative to assess the potential of thermal energy networks and look at tools that we can deploy to help accelerate their adoption where it really makes good financial sense, and to answer a lot of the questions that we've had raised today. If you like the idea of having that work done, if you like the content that we're putting out, please consider becoming a partner. It really does help us to advocate for building decarbonization. I just want to real quick, John, we can go to the next slide on the National Decarbonization Forum. I want to remind folks that that is happening with thanks to our platinum sponsor, Train. We have tickets on sale now. The event probably will sell out. So if you want to come, we're going to have conversations on thermal energy networks as part of our overall building decarbonization strategy. And if anybody has sponsorship budgets that they'd like to get rid of, feel free to give me a shout. We always get asked questions about the recording. It will be put up on our website where you can find all our information, including about the thermal energy network initiative that we have. And with that, we're at time. We appreciate your time and attention today, as always, and look forward to the next webinar, which will probably be scheduled sometime in June. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.